Imagine for a moment that silent night when you find yourself staring at the ceiling, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of life beside someone you chose to walk with. At some point in your heart, the question many hide even from themselves arises. Did I marry the right person? This doubt doesn't just come from comparing oneself to others' happiness, but from a deep, almost spiritual unease that spans generations and cultures. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, said that romantic bonds go far beyond chance or passion. They are invisible threads woven by experiences from other lives, by debts and lessons that still need to be fulfilled. It's not just about loving or not loving someone, but about understanding the role that person plays in our destiny. Perhaps you remember when marriage was celebrated as something definitive, a promise not just before witnesses, but before heaven itself. That until death do us part sounded like a sacred seal, a covenant no one would dare question. But what happens when the heart wavers, and when the silence between two people becomes heavier than loneliness itself? Cayce said that karma is not punishment, but consequence. We choose to meet certain souls again, not because destiny wants to punish us, but because it is in this reunion that the soul finds its chance to grow. Sometimes the love that seemed suffocating is, in fact, the lesson we needed. Other times, the marriage that seemed ideal becomes the prison that prevents us from flourishing. Think of the couples you've known, neighbors, friends, perhaps even your own parents. Some lived decades together, growing old side by side like two trees intertwining roots until no one can separate them anymore. Others, even united, seem to carry an invisible distance, as if each inhabited their own universe. What explains this difference? For Cayce, it's not enough to look at the present. The union of two souls carries memories much older than the mind can recall. They are debts of compassion, broken promises, interrupted dreams. Marrying someone in this sense is not just about building a future, but above all, about repairing a past. Perhaps that's why so many of us feel a strange familiarity the moment we meet someone special. Some say the eyes recognize before reason understands. It's as if one heart remembers the other, even if it can't explain how or why. Cayce affirmed that these reunions are not coincidences. They are invitations from life for us to adjust what was left unfinished. It may be that a partner who today seems impatient or distant was in another life the one you abandoned or hurt. It may also be that the love that arrived late, when commitments had already been made, is an old promise returning to test your fidelity. And it is at this point that the human heart is divided. On one side, the need to keep one's word, to honor the chosen path. On the other, the feeling that something greater is calling, that happiness may be elsewhere. It is not simple. There are no ready answers. But Cayce suggested that before thinking of fleeing or giving up, it was necessary to look within and ask, what is this union trying to teach me? For marriage, according to him, is one of the soul's most demanding schools. It is where we learn to renounce, to forgive, to understand. It is where patience, humility, and generosity are put to the test. And sometimes, only by remaining can we settle an invisible debt. But it is not about blind resignation. There are marriages that, instead of teaching, suffocate life. There are unions that arise from hasty choices, social pressures, or hidden fears, and in these cases, Cayce reminded us that free will still applies. Karma can unite us, but it never forces us to stay where there is no longer a possibility of growth. The difference lies in knowing whether the weight we feel is a lesson or a prison. A lesson asks for patience, but a prison steals hope. And the heart, in its silent wisdom, usually knows the difference. That's why the initial question, did you marry the right person, doesn't find an answer in others' judgments or social appearances. It can only be answered in the silence of the soul, in that intimate place where no mask can be sustained. There are those who married for true love, and even so have to face deep crises to mature. There are those who chose poorly, but discover along the way that even error can be redemptive. The important thing is not to view marriage merely as a contract or a prison. It is, above all, a setting. And on this stage, each character has a role to play. Perhaps you remember a story you heard from your grandparents or from people who lived before you. Couples who fought their whole lives but never separated. Others who, upon losing their partner, seem to lose their breath as well. Some interpret this as tradition or as a lack of options. But Cayce saw beyond. He saw in these bonds the continuity of an ancient dance, sometimes painful, sometimes luminous, but always necessary. Even when love seems to fail, learning does not fail. The soul never leaves empty-handed. And then the reflection deepens. Is the love of your life really the one sleeping beside you, or is true love the learning that this person awakens in you? Because in the end, what we take with us are not rings, nor shared last names, nor houses or inheritances. What we take is how we learned to love even when it was difficult. The karma behind the union, as Cayce said, is this constant invitation to become someone better, to get a little closer to the divine essence that exists in each one. And if you look back at your own story, you might notice how many encounters were necessary for you to get here. How many tears, how many smiles, how many lost and rediscovered embraces. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is in vain. Marriage can be a hit or a miss. It can be joy or pain. But it will always be an essential part of the soul's journey. And as long as love exists, however small, there is also the chance for transformation. There is a curious moment in life when we realize that marriage is not just about two bodies sharing the same house, but about two souls coexisting with invisible histories. Have you ever felt, looking at the person beside you, as if there was something much greater behind what the eyes can see? Edgar Cayce said that every gesture of affection, every conflict, every silence held within it a piece of a spiritual puzzle. Nothing was by chance. If two lives crossed to the point of uniting in matrimony, it's because there was a reason that went beyond what the heart could comprehend at first. Think about how romantic choices are made. Sometimes they seem like an impulse, a sudden infatuation, as if an invisible force pulls two people together. Other times, the decision arises from reason, compatibility, similar values, a life that seems easier as a couple. But in all cases, there is a secret layer. The meeting of karmas. It's as if each person carries a suitcase full of old memories, memories that are not from the present life, but that weigh on the shoulders and influence every word and every decision. And when two suitcases meet, there can be shock, there can be balance, there can be healing. This is where the true story of marriage begins. How many times have you heard someone say, "He changed after he got married," or "She's not the same person anymore"? This happens because marriage acts as a relentless mirror. Suddenly, all the shadows we managed to hide from the world appear before the one we chose to share our life with. Fragilities, fears, needs, everything comes to light. And Cayce reminded us that it is precisely in this confrontation that the purpose of the union lies. It is not to live a fairy tale, but to reveal what needs to be healed. The person you chose may be the greatest challenge your soul has ever faced, but they can also be the key to freeing you from pains you didn't even know you carried. It's curious how the elders in fireside chats always said that marriage wasn't about immediate happiness, but about perseverance. Not because they believed they should accept suffering, but because they intuitively grasped something that Cayce would later confirm. Life as a couple is a workshop. And in a workshop, the hammer and sandpaper are not there to please the wood, but to shape it. Similarly, the friction between husband and wife shapes both, wears away excessive pride, teaches patience, awakens compassion. Every argument is a test. Every reconciliation is a step. And in the silence of ordinary days, when nothing seems extraordinary, that's where the soul is refined. But we cannot ignore that there are marriages where the pain seems greater than the lesson. Many live in silence, believing that enduring is a duty. Others break up in search of air. Which is the right choice? Cayce did not point to ready paths because he said that each soul has its unique journey. However, he warned, before abandoning someone, ask yourself what you have not yet learned from that person. If the answer comes clear, if you feel that the lesson has been fulfilled, perhaps it is time to move on. But if deep inside you, there is a feeling that something was left unfinished, that the story was not resolved, it is a sign that karma still asks for a little more patience. Now, think about the stories you've lived or witnessed. Perhaps you know someone who remained married amidst great difficulties, and years later, discovered a deep complicity, as if the storms had purified the relationship. Perhaps you also know someone who broke off their marriage and later thanked themselves for having freed themselves from a destructive cycle. In both cases, there is learning. Karma is not about holding anyone captive, but about offering the necessary opportunities for the soul to evolve. It's like a winding road. Some curves are long, others dangerous, but all lead to a destination that must be reached. And if we look closely, we will see that marriage is not just about two people, but about entire families. How often does a couple end up healing old wounds from two different lineages? By uniting, not just two hearts are joined, but also histories, traditions, traumas, and hopes of generations. Cayce said that, often, the union comes to correct imbalances that transcend the couple. It is as if two souls accept to carry together a mission of collective healing. Think of the children born of this union. They are often living proof that something greater was at play. They are not just fruits of love, but also messengers of a new beginning. And yet, how many people look back and wonder, did I make the right choice? This doubt corrodes like a silent flame. But perhaps the question isn't about right or wrong, but about meaning. Did the person beside you help you be different from what you would be alone? Even in difficulties, was there growth? Because in the end, marriage will not be judged by the years counted on the calendar, but by the transformation it brought. And sometimes, the shortest union can have a deeper impact than decades lived on autopilot. Curiously, many of Cayce's readings spoke of reunions. People who in another life were enemies returned as husband and wife. Marriage in these cases was not punishment, but reconciliation. It was as if life said, you faced each other yesterday, now learn to walk together. What a mystery, isn't it? Two souls that once hurt each other now embrace even without consciously remembering the past. And it is at this point that marriage becomes sacred, because it offers a second chance that human justice could never grant. And when you think about your own story, you might notice small signs of this. A gesture of irritation that has no apparent reason, but that awakens an old pain within you. An inexplicable tenderness as if the other person has been familiar forever. These are echoes of karma, subtle memories of something that already existed. We ignore them, but the heart does not forget. And that is why in every discussion, in every embrace, there is more than meets the eye. There is an entire life behind it, and perhaps more than one. Thus the question is not just, who did you marry, but what did your soul need to find in this person? Marriage is a human choice, but it is also a divine calling. It is a ground of sacrifices and rewards, of falls and resurrections. It is not perfect, it never was, never will be, but it is real, and in the real is where the soul is forged. Some say that true love is made of peace and harmony, but Edgar Cayce always reminded us that often the deepest love is also the one that challenges us the most. Think for a moment about how the great stories of humanity are rarely linear. They are made of unexpected encounters, almost impossible obstacles, separations, and reunions. Marriage, at its core, follows the same logic. It is not a book with predictable pages, but a plot full of mysteries, where each chapter reveals a part of ourselves that we might not have had the courage to face alone. When two people decide to unite their lives, they bring not only shared dreams, but also hidden fears, insecurities and scars that have been hidden for years. Cayce said that matrimony is like a magic mirror. It reflects not only what we are today, but also what we were and what we still need to become. That is why at certain times the person we love most can become our greatest source of pain. Not because they want to hurt us, but because they inadvertently touch precisely the points that the soul has not yet healed. And in these moments, the question that echoes in so many hearts arises. Why him? Why her? Did I choose wrong? The answer often is not in the present. Cayce affirmed that romantic reunions carry commitments that come from afar. It is as if, before birth, the soul had already agreed to revive certain bonds, to finally repair what was pending. Perhaps you feel irresistibly attracted to someone, even knowing that living together will be difficult. Perhaps you discover years later that the person beside you forces you to develop virtues you would never seek alone. It's not a coincidence, it's purpose. The karma behind the union is not a prison, but an opportunity, even if often it hurts. And how does this manifest in daily life? Think of a couple who live in constant disagreements. To outsiders, it seems like just wear and tear, incompatibility. But under the spiritual lens, it can be a reunion of two souls who in another life did not know how to live together. Now they get a new chance. If they learn to listen, if they know how to compromise, if they manage to transform pride into humility, then they will have fulfilled the lesson that existence offered them. But if they choose to repeat the same mistakes, the wheel of karma will continue to turn, and the learning will be postponed. At the same time, there are couples who seem to find each other so naturally that everything flows, as if they had known each other for centuries. This feeling of immediate familiarity is often the sign of a positive reunion, where karma comes not as a debt, but as a blessing. These are souls who have already learned together and now can simply share the path, strengthening each other. For Cayce, these unions are true gifts, rewards from ancient journeys, but even in them there is no absence of challenges, because life always finds ways to make us grow, and growing is never an entirely painless process. And what happens when a marriage doesn't last? When separation comes? Many see this as failure. But Cayce suggested that, in some cases, breaking up can also be part of the plan. Perhaps two people united only for the time necessary to complete a specific lesson. After that, the bond loses strength, because the mission was fulfilled. It's like a book reaching the end of a chapter. The story doesn't need to be dragged out beyond what's necessary. Therefore, separation can be painful, but also liberating. It's not always a sign of error, but often a sign of completion. How many times have you heard stories of people who, after a difficult divorce, rediscovered a strength within themselves they never imagined they had, or who, years later, found a new love that seemed much more aligned with who they had become? This is also karma, not as punishment but as adjustment. The soul is guided from experience to experience until it reaches the maturity it needs. And the curious thing is that looking back, many recognize that even the pains had meaning. What seemed unbearable in the end was what shaped them. But of course, there is also the other side, marriages that last until the end of life. And in these, often the greatness is not in never fighting or living in constant peace, but in the silent persistence of staying together despite imperfections. Imagine two old people sitting on the porch, wrinkled hands intertwined, laughing at memories of decades. How many ups and downs did they face? How many times did they think about giving up? How many tears were hidden? How many words had to be swallowed? Yet, there they are side by side, not because everything was easy, but because they chose to grow with each other. Cayce saw in these couples proof that love, when sustained by mutual learning, becomes one of existence's most transformative forces. And perhaps herein lies an important secret. Marriage is not about finding the perfect person, but about becoming a person capable of loving better. When the soul understands this, burdens shift, fights cease to be mere wear and tear and become opportunities for understanding. Differences cease to be walls and transform into bridges. Of course, we cannot always act this way. We are human, we carry flaws. But the simple effort to try already opens the way for karma to dissolve into compassion. Perhaps you, listening to these words, now recall your own union, past or present. Perhaps you see in it moments of pain, joy, doubt. All of this is part of the process. The question, did you marry the right person, does not have a universal answer. It is not resolved in the eyes of others, nor in social expectations. It is resolved in the intimacy of the soul, in that secret place where only you and the divine know the truth. For some, the answer is a calm, almost obvious yes. For others, it is a painful but necessary no. For many, it is an I don't know yet, because the lesson is still ongoing. And while one does not know, life continues to teach. Every morning is a new chance to look at the one beside you with a little more patience, a little more compassion. Because in the end, perhaps the true meaning of marriage is not to guarantee permanent happiness, but to offer the soul the necessary conditions to evolve. And of all possible lessons, loving is always the greatest. Perhaps the greatest mystery of marriage is precisely the one we can never explain in words. The feeling that, beside someone, we are facing an inevitable destiny. Edgar Cayce said that romantic bonds are not accidents, but choices made on deeper planes than human consciousness can reach. When two souls decide to unite, be it for love, necessity, or even impulse, there is always an invisible thread guiding the encounter. This thread, which we call karma, is not punishment, but an invitation. An invitation to grow, to repair, to learn to love more fully. Many spend their lives asking, did I choose correctly? But perhaps the truer question is, what is this choice teaching me? Because the union, whether long or brief, happy or painful, always leaves marks, and these marks are the true heritage of the soul. Houses, possessions, shared surnames, all of that remains. But the silent transformation that marriage produces, no one can take away. It is what we carry with us beyond life, and perhaps it is precisely what reunites us in the next. Think about how time reveals truths that we initially don't see. The passionate gaze of youth sees enchantments, promises, future dreams. But over the years, living together exposes fragilities, reveals limits, demands patience. That's when the question returns, what if I had chosen differently? Cayce said that this doubt is natural, but that wisdom lies in realizing that it's not just about who we choose, but what we make of the choice. Even a turbulent marriage can be transformed into a path of healing if there is a willingness to learn. And even a seemingly perfect union can become empty if it is lived only on the surface. Perhaps you know couples who stayed together for decades without ever experiencing great passion, but who built a solid life based on daily care. And perhaps you know others who lived intense loves, but who fell apart with the same force with which they began. The value is not in the form, but in the learning that each path provides. Cayce reminded us that life does not only measure external results, but above all internal evolution. This is what defines whether you married the right person, not in the sense of right or wrong, but in the sense of fulfilling what your soul needed to experience. And when we think of the word karma, many associate it with burden, with debt. But for Cayce, karma is merely cause and effect. If in another life you failed to love, life will give you new opportunities. If you hurt someone, perhaps you need to meet them again to make amends. If you promised fidelity and did not fulfill it, you may have to face the pain of betrayal to understand what it means. Marriage in this context is not just a romance, but a spiritual classroom, sometimes difficult, sometimes gentle, but always necessary. And the most surprising thing is that learning is never just individual. When two people marry, their families, their histories, their destinies intertwine. Think of how many transformations happen from a single union. Children born, grandchildren to come, traditions that mingle. Every gesture within a marriage echoes far beyond the couple. It's like throwing a stone into a lake. The waves spread in circles, touching distant shores. Cayce saw in this the proof that there is no union without purpose. Even the briefest have an impact. Even the most painful leave seeds. And if you stop to remember, you will see that even marriages considered failures taught something essential. How many people discovered their strength after a divorce? How many found in themselves an independence they had never imagined? How many learned to value true love precisely because they experienced its absence? Nothing is lost, not even the tears shed in silence. Everything serves as material for the soul to transform. Perhaps that is why the elderly, when they speak of their lives, rarely dwell only on the pains or the enchantments. They tell stories of overcoming, of patience, of difficult choices, of forgiveness. And in these memories we realize that marriage is not just a union of two people, but a complete narrative, full of unexpected chapters. Each couple carries a unique book, which can only be read in the intimacy of the two. And each reader, each of us, finds in this book the lessons they needed to learn. Cayce also recalled something fundamental. Marriage is a place of mutual transformation. Neither person leaves the same as they entered. You may not have married the person you dreamed of, but you certainly married the person who had something to reveal in you. Sometimes this revelation is painful, other times it is liberating, but it is always necessary. And if looking back you realize that you have become someone more compassionate, more patient, more capable of loving, then the answer to the big question is clear. Yes, you married the right person, not because it was perfect, but because it was essential. And if life has brought you here with doubts, know that there is no definitive answer as long as the heart still beats. Perhaps there are still lessons to be learned in the silence of the home, in the routine that seems ordinary, in the small gestures that deep down carry greatness. Marriage does not have to be extraordinary to be sacred. It becomes sacred when it is lived with consciousness, when it transforms into a path of evolution. And in the end, when age weighs heavily and memory is filled with recollections, it is not the number of fights or kisses that matters, but the certainty that the journey had meaning. Some will depart hand in hand, others separated, but all will carry with them the same lesson. Love is always greater than circumstances. And if there is still something to be resolved, life will give another chance in another time, in another body, because the thread of karma is never lost. So perhaps the question is no longer, did I marry the right person? But, what did I learn from the person I married? This silent and intimate answer is what truly matters. It is what dissolves guilt, heals resentments, and turns every tear into a step. And it is what prepares us for the greatest of all reunions, the one with ourselves, when we finally understand that all love lived, even imperfect, has brought us a little closer to what we are destined to be.